They called it a war, but it was closer to an extinction event. Not for us, but for them. The Galactic Coalition had never feared a species before. They had conquered thousands of worlds, crushed rebellion after rebellion, and rewritten the fate of entire civilizations, either with the stroke of a treaty or the blast of a battleship's cannons. The universe was their garden, and they were its gardeners, deciding which species thrived and which were cut down. Then they met us. It began like all the others. A diplomatic vessel arrived in the Sol system, transmitting what they called the standard terms of integration. They claimed it was an offer, but in truth, there was only one real outcome. Humanity would surrender its independence, supply soldiers for the Coalition's endless wars, and dismantle Earth's military forces. In return, we would be granted protection and access to interstellar trade. It was the same deal that countless others across the stars had accepted. We said no. At first, the envoys were patient. They repeated their offer, confident we would recognize the futility of resistance. When we refused again, they issued their standard warning. Integration is not optional. Should conflict arise, the Galactic Coalition will ensure minimal suffering. They underestimated how much suffering we could endure. The first invasion fleet arrived in force. Hundreds of sleek, silver warships descended into orbit. Bristling with weapons, their troops prepared for a brief campaign. They had done this 1,000 times before, shattering the defenses of weaker races, crushing resistance, installing governors, and rewriting history. But they had never fought us. Their ships darkened the skies over Earth, looming above our cities, broadcasting their final offer. Our response came as an orbital strike on their command vessel. A relentless barrage of missiles and railgun rounds shattered their arrogance in an instant. The flagship crumpled under the assault, its wreckage burning through the atmosphere like a rain of fire. Their arrogance should have died with it. Instead, they escalated. The full might of the Galactic Coalition came in waves, determined to correct what they saw as a minor miscalculation. They expected the war to last weeks at most. It dragged on for years. Their first mistake was assuming we would break. Their second was assuming we would fight by their rules. The Coalition fought with precision, their strategies shaped by centuries of war doctrine. They struck military targets with cold efficiency, expecting resistance to crumble in the face of overwhelming force. We didn't fight fair. We fought to win. They learned the meaning of total war. We buried their soldiers under collapsed cities, turned orbital stations into battering rams, poisoned their supply lines, and detonated entire ships, stuffing them with explosives and ramming them into their fleets. Every battle that should have been a decisive victory for them became a nightmare. And the worst part, we never stopped coming. Their records had no precedent for this level of endurance. Their own soldiers, trained for swift, calculated campaigns, broke long before ours did. They called us reckless. They called us mad. They called us monsters. What they didn't understand was that we knew the stakes from the beginning. Surrender wasn't an option. There would be no treaties, no reconstruction under alien rule, no mercy. If they won, we would be erased. The war dragged on, and cracks in the Coalition's resolve began to spread. First, their soldiers started surrendering. Then, their commanders began retreating. Then, entire factions of their empire, once so loyal, started defecting, unwilling to continue fighting a war that had become an abyss. The breaking point came when we took the war to them. Earth, battered and bruised, still stood. But survival wasn't enough. We built our own fleets, reverse-engineered their technology, and turned their weapons against them. The invasion of their capital world was a lesson they would never forget. We didn't just defeat them. We shattered them. Their fleets burned. Their leaders fled. Their strongest strongholds crumbled under human firepower. There were no offers of surrender, no negotiations. They had never given humanity a choice, so we gave them none. When the war finally ended, the Galactic Coalition was no more. The survivors whispered of humanity in hushed voices, warning of the species that had fought not just with weapons, but with something far worse: the refusal to be conquered. No species ever dared challenge us again, not because of our strength, but because of what they saw in us, and what they feared they might become. The ruins of the once mighty Galactic Coalition still drifted through the void, a graveyard of broken metal and shattered arrogance. The war was over, but humanity was not finished. We had learned something dangerous, something the Coalition had never wanted us to understand. We were stronger than them. The few remaining worlds still flying the Coalition's banner sent desperate transmissions, begging for negotiations, for a ceasefire, for anything that might halt the storm that was coming for them. But there was no mercy left in us. Not after what they had done. Not after the years we spent clawing for survival. Our fleets pushed deeper into their space, system by system, dismantling what remained of their empire. Entire planets surrendered without a fight, terrified of what humanity had become. We didn't bomb them. We didn't waste resources occupying them. We simply stripped their war machines for parts, seized every piece of technology we could use, and left them to watch as we moved forward. Some had the sense to flee, vanishing into the darkness of uncharted space. But most remained, frozen in place, unable to comprehend what had happened. For centuries, they had seen themselves as masters of the galaxy. Now, they were nothing more than relics of a broken order, forced to witness the rise of something new. And still, we pressed forward. The last remnants of their military forces made their stand in the outer rim, a desperate attempt to salvage what little they had left. They gathered their remaining ships and soldiers, fortifying their defenses, believing, hoping, that we would finally stop, that we had taken enough. But it was never about conquest. It was never about revenge. It was about making sure that no one ever tried to do this to us again. The final battle would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their most hardened warriors gathered in one place for the last stand of their civilization, and we tore through them like a storm. They had thought they were fighting a war, just another campaign, another lesson to be taught to an unruly species. They never realized the truth. This wasn't war. This was survival. We had nothing left to lose. No hesitation. No retreat. We had been forged in the fire they tried to drown us in, and what emerged was something they could not comprehend. The battle lasted days, then hours, then minutes as their defenses crumbled. Their ships burned in the vacuum of space. Their last stronghold shattered. And then it was over. Their leaders, the same ones who had declared war on us, were found cowering in the depths of their last command station, waiting for death. They expected execution. They expected vengeance. We gave them neither. Instead, they were forced to watch as we dismantled the last remains of their empire. They saw their own people abandon them, their own warriors surrender, their own planets fall silent. There would be no triumphant return, no legends of sacrifice, no hope of rebuilding. There was nothing left for them but exile and the knowledge that they had lost everything. And still, we were not done. The war had changed us. The men who had once fought only to defend Earth now looked beyond it, beyond our own survival. The galaxy had come for us first. Now, it was ours to decide what happened next. Some argued for peace, saying we had done enough, that the remnants of the Coalition posed no further threat, that we could go home. But home was no longer enough. Humanity had reached beyond our world, beyond the stars that had once been so distant. We had seen what lay beyond, and we had claimed our place in it. We would not sit idle while the rest of the universe rebuilt, waiting for another empire to rise and threaten us again. We would not wait for the next war. We would be ready. There was no celebration when the last of the Coalition's fleets fell. No cheers. No declarations of victory. Humanity had won. But this wasn't the kind of victory anyone had dreamed of. We had expected an enemy that would fight to the bitter end, one that would never surrender, never yield. But the truth was far simpler. The moment they realized they couldn't win, they gave up. The species that had once ruled the stars crumbled under the weight of a war they had started, but never truly believed they could lose. The galaxy had been theirs. Now, it belonged to us. But what did that mean? There was no more enemy to fight. No empire left to overthrow. The last of their warships drifted lifeless in the void, abandoned or scrapped for parts. The planets that had once sworn allegiance to the Coalition now looked to us, waiting to see what we would do next. Some of our own argued that it was time to go home, that we had proven ourselves, that humanity could finally rest. But there was no home to go back to, not as we had once known it. Earth was still there, scarred but alive, but it was no longer the center of our existence. We had changed. The men who had fought in the war, who had bled and struggled across 1,000 battlefields, could not simply return to the lives they had left behind. There was too much still to do, too many questions left unanswered. What would humanity become? For the first time in history, we were no longer just fighting for survival. We had secured our place in the universe, not as victims, not as conquered people, but as something greater. We were no longer the ones looking up at the stars, wondering what lay beyond. Now, we decided what happened next, and that terrified them more than anything. The surviving species of the former coalition didn't dare move against us. They didn't try to reclaim their lost territory or restore their old order. They had seen what we were capable of, and the fear of another war with us kept them silent. That was how humanity ruled. Not with laws, not with treaties, but with the memory of what had happened. Every wrecked ship, every abandoned world, every scar left on the galaxy was a reminder that we had not just survived. We had endured. We had fought. And we had won. Some species tried to rebuild in the shadows, whispering of a future where humanity would fall, where the old order would return. But they never dared act on it. Not after what they had seen. Not after what they had learned. The last war with humans had been so brutal, so absolute, that no one in the galaxy ever dared challenge us again. And that was exactly how we wanted it. The years that followed were strange ones. There was no government, no new empire to rise in place of the one we had destroyed. Humanity had no interest in ruling the way the coalition had. We didn't set up a new capital or force our laws onto others. We had seen what that kind of power did to civilizations. But we didn't disappear either. Our war fleets didn't stand down. Our weapons weren't decommissioned. Our soldiers didn't go home. The galaxy called us many things. Conquerors, warriors, monsters. But they all understood one thing. Humanity had claimed its place in the stars. And no one was ever going to take it away from us. At first, the surviving species thought they might tempt us with diplomacy. They sent ambassadors, emissaries carrying gifts, hoping to soften us. We listened, but we never compromised. We had learned that words were cheap, that treaties were just another way to delay war. We didn't want alliances. We wanted security. The war had taken its toll, and while humanity had emerged stronger than ever, we were not fools. We knew what fear did to the weak. We had seen it before, seen the way those who had once wielded power reacted when it was taken from them. So we made an example. There was one world left, one stronghold of the old coalition that had refused to acknowledge what had happened. A planet called Zyros, once a military hub, still bristling with hidden weapon caches and underground strongholds. Its leaders had refused to surrender, believing they could wait us out, that if they stayed silent long enough, humanity would turn inward, break apart, fade into history. They were wrong. The fleet we sent wasn't massive. It wasn't an armada designed for a prolonged campaign. It was a hammer. The bombardment lasted less than an hour. When it was done, Zyros was gone. Not occupied. Not conquered. Erased. No survivors. No warnings. Just silence. The galaxy understood then. We weren't here to rule. We were here to make sure no one ever made the same mistake again. For centuries, the Coalition had been the unchallenged power of the galaxy, shaping the future of entire civilizations. Now, the memory of that empire was nothing more than a whisper, a cautionary tale told to children of species that had once been mighty. The war had ended, but the lesson remained, and for the first time in history, the galaxy was truly at peace. Because no one dared risk another war with humans,